His films have won 25 Academy Awards. His name is David Lean. And now, after 2 years of production for MGM, he is creating his most beautiful film, Ryan's Daughter, a story of love. Sarah Miles is Rosie Ryan, a dreamer, a wild, romantic girl who falls in love with a very ordinary, gentle man. An unusual role for one of the screen's most dynamic performers, Robert Mitchum. The intense young actor Christopher Jones is Randolph, the brooding war hero who returns from the German front to fight a different kind of enemy. John Mills, Leo McKern, Trevor Howard. 3 of the world's finest screen performers are the other major figures in the conflict of Rosie Ryan's life. It is a time of great change, and Rosie Ryan has become a woman in a society that cannot fulfill her needs. She is an enigma even to David Lean.
She expects God knows what out of life, some great romantic outcome. When she's about 19, she falls in love with her schoolmaster.
Charles Shaughnessy is the teacher who opened to Rosie a new world, with stories of Byron and Beethoven and the heroes of ancient times.
Because she has a good mind and she has a lot of imagination, because he taught her things, she imagines that he has all these qualities that she's read into them. In fact, he hasn't. He's a very simple, ordinary chap.
Only after they marry does Rosie come to understand that he has no answers at all, and so she turns to another.
What more are you wanting now?
I don't know that either.
That's a lie.
What?
Trevor Howard plays a
Come on,
priest.
Rosie.
He's a tough peasant. He has no difficulty whatever in knowing what is right and wrong. He thinks he knows it all. Of course he doesn't. He hasn't got much imagination, but he's a good man. Leo McKern plays a pub keeper. He's a blusterer, great patriot, and he turns out to be an informer.
Bad luck to the British. Success to the Germans. And a very good morning to you, Corporal.
John Mills is a half-wit. He doesn't have a line of dialogue to say. I think he gives an absolutely wonderful performance.
Trapped by her environment and the weakness of her people, unable to comprehend her growing needs as a woman, Rosie Ryan continues to search elsewhere for the experience of fulfillment.
And then another young man appears on the scene, Christopher Jones, actually. And of course they're in for it.
David Lean and his Academy Award-winning writer, Robert Bolt, spent months developing these characters and their story on paper, and transferring the words to film has taken almost 2 years. It began with an extensive search for a location. The films of David Lean are always inspired by the dramatic beauty of their settings. And for Ryan's Daughter, he found one of the most beautiful settings in the world. The forbidding aspect of the location is clearly reflected in the faces of the people and in their history of war, rebellion, and suffering. But then a village had to be found that would equally reflect the nature of their lives. With the same meticulous attention to detail, David Lean has constructed his entire film, the painstaking development of the script, the careful selection of the cast, sensitive enough to respond to the most exacting direction, the precise creation of every sequence, every scene, every shot. Like Bridge on the River Kwai, Ryan's Daughter deals with man's struggle against the forces of nature. Like Lawrence of Arabia, it is a study of the inner workings of the human mind. Like Dr. Zhivago, it is a story of love, set against a background of war and revolution. Like any film by David Lean, it is a masterpiece.
The film is Ryan's Daughter, set in 1916 at the time of the Irish Rebellion. Thomas Ryan's pub is the focal point of the village, and Ryan's Daughter is the central character.
There's always a fear, you know, when one makes a picture for a large budget, and this is a large budget, not because we wanted to spend a lot of money, but because the subject itself placed here in the wild west of Ireland, is an expensive film to do. We're at the mercy of weather, as you can hear the wind howling around here at this moment. If we'd made it in the studio, we could have done it in, of course, about a quarter of the time. But we want to get the real smell of the outside. And if you're going to do that sort of thing, you can't afford to make a film that is only going to be shown in small art houses.
Good luck!
Robert Mitchum plays Charles, the local schoolmaster, and Sarah Miles is Rosie, the publican's daughter.
First position, please.
She starts as a young girl, and she ends up in the course of a year as a woman who's seen a very great deal in that time. You have 5 men and 1 girl, and that's Ryan's daughter. And those men are all of different ages, and in one way or another, all these men love her.
I think she's an average girl in that she wants more than she has, and what she has, she can't really accept what it is and wants something extra. It's about dreams and fantasies and realizing to be happy with what you've got, that terrible tune of whatever that song is, you know. And she goes through a lot. She's a very courageous girl, in that she gets something else which she shouldn't get, and through doing this ruins everything.
Johnny Mills is playing a half-wit, and he watches all the way through the story. He sees her fall in love with Charles. He, by accident, is the first person to know of her love for Randolph, Christopher Jones' part. He is the sort of unseen bird hovering over our head throughout the whole film. And it's when she goes at the end, his real interest in the village is gone. His life is over.
I don't think you've ever played a part like this before. You've got no lines at all as the villager.
No, absolutely none.
How do you approach a characterization like that?
Well, strangely enough, it's taken more homework, this particular part, than I think any part I've ever played with masses of lines. I find that I have to do an awful lot of thinking about it. People don't think I'm thinking, but I am. And it needs much more preparation than I ever really thought it would.
This is interesting because I've noticed, watching you working, that although you've got this marvellous makeup, but even with the special teeth that you have,
yes,
you don't really look the part until you start thinking about it.
But I think that is true. And I think that sometimes if stills are taken when I'm not actually thinking and playing Michael, it just looks like me, as if some dreadful accident has happened to me, but it doesn't look like the character, although it's grotesque. I mean, as you know what happens, the mouth is all crooked, and I have teeth that I put in. But I think that is true.
Relax.
Scene 459, take 2. Robert Mitchum is playing a schoolmaster, and she's been his pupil, and she thinks he's a man of great imagination because she's taught him, opened the windows to everything she's known. And in fact, he has no imagination at all, but she marries him, and it's a mistake.
Robert Mitchum, you've made, I think, well over 60 films, and this part seems to be very different from anything else you've tackled. Is that basically why you took it, do you think?
No,
Why?
I have no idea why.
Wasn't anything to do with the fact that you were about to commit suicide?
No, that was the alternative.
Who dissuaded you from this?
Mr. Bolt.
How?
Well, he said if I'd wait until the end of the film, he'd be happy to stand the expense of my burial.
Trevor Howard's playing a priest, a peasant priest. And the great virtue about him is that he's a simple man, and he finds it very, very easy to tell right from wrong. This is right and this is wrong.
I knew perfectly well what this was going to be. No illusions about it at all. I knew it would be the best part of a year of misery, but that it would 99% chance of being a very great picture.
And we've got that very good actor, Leo McKern, playing Rosie's father. He's a publican, a local publican, and has an appearance of being a great Irish patriot. And in fact, he's an informer.
He's a traitor, a coward, a rich man, a powerful man in the village. I mean, comparatively speaking, you can see what the village is like. But a man with an enormous exterior and a very small soul.
And then along comes another character, who's going to be Chris Jones, who's much more her own age, about her own age, in fact. And, of course, that all blows up.
He's very, very bright and intelligent. An enormous amount of power comes out of him.
They're in this very remote part of the world, and the rebellion comes into their lives, goes out of it, comes in again. It's the catalyst for a whole lot of happenings in the film.
Sarah Miles, of course, is married to Robert Bolt. Bolt's previous collaborations with David Lean were Lawrence of Arabia in 1962 and Dr. Zhivago, which won the 1967 Academy Award for Best Screenplay. This one, Ryan's Daughter, is an original story.
I had an idea, and indeed I had a script in rough form. And I was talking to David on the telephone. He was in Italy, I was in England. And asked him if he would like to see it, and he said yes. And he wrote back saying no. But the letter saying no was about 70 pages of close typescript. So that his reasons for no were sort of very interesting, and I wrote back, not quite at such length. And gradually from this correspondence emerged the idea of an original script. We both wanted to do the same kind of film. And then the time came when the correspondence was no longer adequate. And so we said, well, shall we have a go at it? I went out to Rome, and the first day I was there, I arrived in the morning, he gave me lunch, we started talking in the afternoon. The next day I went in the same hotel, just along the corridor, roughed out what I thought the general pattern of the film should be. Took it to him, more conversation, got the rough outline correct after, say, a month. Then I began writing in detail, and every day, or almost every day, would show David what I'd done, and he would be either enthusiastic or less enthusiastic. We would argue. And finally, we had argued, sometimes quite bitterly and at length, over every line of dialogue, almost every shot. Not literally every shot, of course. We didn't write a shooting script. And that's the degree of the closeness of the work.
He didn't write it for me. Towards the end, I think he decided, when David met me, David decided I was right for it, but not until about three-quarters of the way through.
But were you, as it were, hovering on the sidelines, hoping like mad that
No,
you'd get it?
because I didn't know what they were writing, and I refused to look at any of what they were doing, even though they were handing me pages. I said, no, I don't want to know, because I have a terrible sort of destructive quality, and I knew I'm terribly pessimistic, and I didn't think for a moment that it would happen, and happen for me. So I sort of blanked the whole thing off and just went on mucking out stables and things like that.
I visualize very vaguely, simply in terms of atmosphere. Now, the technical capturing of that is more than technique. This is so in any art, isn't it, that you cannot say whether the technique is the necessary craft is a difficulty or a stimulus. It is both at once. I'm sure that oil painters hate their oil paint, at the same time are in love with it. Now, it's the same with David and the camera. So that he says, oh, charming. He looks at a little bit of wordy description. He says, it's easy enough to write. How the devil do I do that? And I said, well, I don't know. You know, you're the man. And then to see him beginning to achieve this with the camera, and more than that, being stimulated by the difficulties into something that is perhaps better than the original intention, so that it is very much more than a mechanical translation from script onto film. It's a highly creative process.
Well, I worked as one of David Lean's assistant directors over the last 11, 12 years, which has taken up 3 major pictures, and very interesting working with him because you learn so much, because he's one of the few directors who really takes an interest in the whole unit, and if they're interested in the film, and that means by looking through the camera when you're looking at a setup, he calls all different people, and especially his assistants for the crowd scenes, and quite a few directors don't.
Well, I started with David on as first assistant on Lawrence and then on Zhivago, and did both those pictures as first. Since then, I started as associate producer, and this is my first one in that capacity. My day starts around about 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, looking at the weather, and we have most probably 4 or 5 alternatives, as the weather is so fickle here. So that when we make a decision at 8:30 in the morning, all the transport will go from one place to another. He gets the transport off, somebody else gets the actors, so we have things going from one sort of various points to that particular location. So we all arrive around about half an hour later, hoping that they've got there and nothing got broken down or disappeared or something. But it works well, and it's the only way we can do it over here, because it is impossible to make any plans the night before.
Hold it, whoa.
The extras in Ryan's Daughter, although they're Irish, are not local inhabitants, but tinkers from Tralee, 40 miles away. David Lean says that unlike professional extras, they had the right kind of faces. Each day they're brought to the location by special coach. They stand around, getting well fed and well paid. Occasionally they're called upon to act and react.
I suppose the main difference between David and most other directors I work with, with the exception of 1 or 2, is the great attention to detail. If it is that way written in the script, that's the way we're going to get it, and we're going to wait for the weather, and we're going to get the sets and the everything absolutely right, and nothing will start until it is right. And whereas normally, due to schedules and budgets, we do work under much more of a compromise than we are on this. It is right on this, even if we have to come back and do it tomorrow.
All sorts of things have changed. I mean, nowadays, as far as I can make out, it's not terribly with it to have good photography. People don't worry so much about having good sound, compositions out. Everything's got to be a little bit rougher.
He couldn't wait to get a film finished so that it was intimate, it was small. Part of him loved the greatness, but the intimacy of the cutting room when he was left alone with his characters, piecing those characters together, was one of the greatest parts of making a movie for David.
Norma Savage, the editor of Ryan's Daughter, had worked with David previously twice before. In fact, first I believe he worked as an associate editor on Lawrence of Arabia, and then subsequently when David was making Dr. Zhivago, Norman became the editor of Dr. Zhivago. So we set up the cutting rooms as soon as David came back from South Africa. I think he probably had a few days rest, and then we started editing. I think the finished film pretty much reflects the original script. Win Ryder was the sound editor, and he was certainly one of Europe's or England's premier sound designers, and he worked very, very hard upon the soundtrack, and it's a tremendous part of the film. Again, it's part of David's idea of nature. The nature is a character within the film, the landscape and the weather, and Win took full advantage of that knowledge.
Music was important to him. He loved jazz, and nobody really knew that side of David. He adored jazz. He loved Ella Fitzgerald, and but music to him in a movie could be used in place of dialogue as a dramatic sequence. Because if you look at a lot of David Lean movies, they're sparse on dialogue, very sparse. So he used it as a rhythm.
Ryan's Daughter was very interesting for me because he asked me to go to Ireland for 3 months when he was shooting the film, because it works very well for a composer when he is involved practically from when the script is finished. And usually when I work once with a director, and if he asks me for the second time or third time, the second time he gave me everything from the beginning, which is much, much better.
He understood, which is why David loved working with him, he understood the character of Michael, for example, and brought out the clumsiness with the music. And I think that was what was so wonderful, that he interlinked the music with the character so well.
After viewing Ryan's Daughter with my parents, my father said to me that he had dedicated his performance to me, which was, it was just a beautiful gift.
I was on stage, so I couldn't get off. I'm rather glad I didn't, because I gather that the whole thing broke down at the premiere in England. My mother said it was an absolute nightmare. We were in darkness for an hour and a half in the theatre. That didn't help the reviews either, I tell you.
In a way, the film is magnificent in many ways, and you see it 35 years later. You realize that a lot of unfairness went on about in the way he was treated. And you can see why, in a way, some people would react with this rather violent reaction against this type of filmmaking.
I think David, to some extent at that point, was trying to live up to his own legend. And with Ryan's Daughter, he applied epic techniques to a rather small story, so that the storm, for instance, it had to be the biggest storm ever. And you felt that it was a little bit overblown. And I think people sensed that with the picture, that this love story, this tragic triangle somehow didn't need this huge epic treatment.
David talked to me about the release of Ryan's Daughter in a very painful way. I think it was the pinnacle sort of crisis of his career, because until then there had been huge accolade about almost every film he made, and suddenly he was being heavily criticized.
The critics hammered this movie into the ground. He got a bit of it on Dr. Zhivago. The critics did not embrace it. But it was such a tremendous hit that coupled, you know, with what the critics thought of it and the great box office returns, the critics had their nails sharpened for Ryan's Daughter, and they went at it.
He was devastated, completely devastated, and just wanted to run, and he ran.
I think my father was disappointed that the movie was not better received. I mean, he didn't talk a lot about it, but he did express that to me at one point, that he was sorry that it wasn't more popular. I think it was, you know, it was such a labor of love for everyone.
It hit Robert very hard, too. They were very cruel, you know, very cruel. Mitchum was pissed on, Robert, David. We all got it. We all got a very bad press. I don't know what it was about, but it was vicious. I think there was just jealousy and envy that these two men had done two such successful films and they weren't going to let them have another one. That's what it was. No way were these two going to get another triumph.
He got a particularly bad reception at the New York Film Critics Circle, which had a special meeting to meet the man who had made one of their favorite movies, Brief Encounter.
Unfortunately, we met on Sundays, and the previous Sunday there had been this disastrous screening of Ryan's Daughter at the Ziegfeld. I mean, people were hooting and hollering and laughing at the screen, especially when John Mills came on. You know, it was clear the buzz in New York was, you know, suddenly very anti-David Lean and anti-Ryan's Daughter. I mean, I don't think anybody in that room of critics had anything good to think about or say about Ryan's Daughter. And I was chairman of the group that year, so it was my duty to kind of run this meeting. So Lean came in, and he'd come directly from the airport. And I opened the meeting by saying, now, I believe that, you know, this room is kind of disappointed with Ryan's Daughter. But I said, I think we must discuss it in the context of David Lean's distinguished career, you know, trying to... Well, I mean, the assault was just immediate and ferocious. Lean was obviously in a state of shock. Finally, he said, I don't understand. He said, I don't understand what you people are saying or trying to say. I don't know how he couldn't understand. It was perfectly clear to me. I mean, to my shame, I said, well, they don't understand how the director of Great Expectations and Oliver Twist and Brief Encounter could have made this piece of crap, except I didn't say crap. But he went away from the meeting saying that Richard Schickel had called his new movie crap. And he went around thereafter, you know, saying, well, that's why I stopped directing for the next 14 years, because this critic, and he always named me, you know, never named the other people who were assaulting him much more ferociously than I was. So, I mean, I guess I have to go through life with this allegedly hostile act hanging off my shoulders. I don't particularly feel any guilt about it at all. I mean, if I had it to do over again, I wouldn't have called this movie crap. But I'm not taking the fall for his 14 years of silence either.
But what they weren't looking at was the timelessness of that particular brilliant idea of David's and Robert's, which was to get a small story and make it huge canvas, and it will be timeless through history, and that's what you've got.
In Ryan's Daughter, we'd been filming for about 3 or 4 months, and I sat and watched the dailies or rushes with David. I was the only actor to do it, and I think it was a scene in the village when I had lobster, and David suddenly said to me, "Johnny, have you ever had an Oscar?" I said, "No." 9 months later, I got it.
They always recognised sort of that kind of film, and it was David Lean after all, so I presumed that we would be recognised for something, and I'm so happy it was Freddie Young.
It's funny about Ryan's Daughter. It has this reputation as David Lean's one flop. It wasn't. Going to the movies used to be this wonderful experience. They would overpower you. You'd really be taken right into them. You know, you weren't hit over the head as you are today. They brought you in with them, and it was a world you wanted to inhabit. So that's what Ryan's Daughter is. You know, it's a wonderful vacation in Ireland. You know you're not going to have to stay there, but have a drink at the pub.
The thing about David, he loved young people on the crew. He was very strict. Maybe it was his Quaker upbringing. He was very, very strict, but he was wonderful to work for because when he asked you to do something for him, you knew exactly in your mind what you had to do. He was so clear. And whatever you did for him, he really appreciated it without being pretentious. He was never a pretentious man. He wasn't interested in what status you had on the picture. You were his crew. You were with him.
He was a kind man, much more kind than anybody knows. He was an ordinary man. And I never figured it. Was he tough on the outside and soft on the in? Or was it the other way round? Was he soft on the outside and very tough on the inside? And I never, ever quite figured that one out. But it worked. He made movies, whatever way it was. He could make movies. He got things done.
But I think with David, what really he loved most of all was to make a movie that he would want to see.
You know, he was 81, he wanted to make Nostromo. It was a huge picture. And of course he didn't get to make it because he got cancer. And, you know, he was 2 weeks away from shooting and they had to stop, and he was hoping that he would recover enough to be able to do it. I went to see him just, you know, shortly before he died, and he said, "Haven't we been lucky, John? They let us make movies." And I said, "Yeah, they did everything they could to stop us, didn't they?" He said, "Yeah, but we fooled them." And then, as I was leaving, he said, "You know, I do hope I'll get well enough to make this film," he said, "because I feel I'm just beginning to get the hang of it."
I just love, I love photographs. I love a thing like that camera. I wanted to go and look through it. In fact, I think I looked through it yesterday. I'm very attracted by lights, film. I even like the feel of film. I don't know what I'd have done. I often, although I know nothing about music at all, I would love to have been a conductor.